Hello and welcome to the Northwood University webinar series. I'm Christopher Deming, and today we have a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion and how being engaged in these topics can improve your personal and professional lives. I have a few administrative housekeeping items that I'd like to talk with you about. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. We're so glad that you're here. This webinar is being recorded and it will be sent to you after the fact along with a survey. We use these surveys to help determine what our future events will be like. So whether you like it, you don't like it, if there's questions, comments, concerns, or suggestions, please place those in the survey that you will receive after the fact. Today, we are very excited to have some wonderful guest speakers, and today's format will be a little bit different than we've done in the past in that I am going to rely on my wonderful colleague, Jeremiah Lee, to moderate today's talk with our guest speakers. Jeremiah is the Director of International Student Engagement at Northwood University and is a leader on diversity, equity, and inclusion at the campus. I'm also getting a note. Production tells me that today is Jeremiah's birthday. So I want to thank Jeremiah for sharing his special day with us today. Wish you a happy birthday, and I will pass it on to Jeremiah and let you go forward.
All right, thanks so much, Chris. Wouldn't have it any other way. I'm happy to be spending this birthday with all of you today. So as Chris mentioned, my role here at Northwood University is Director of International Student Engagement, but I'm also a multicultural advisor. So what my roles here are is international student support, handling immigration for an institution, but also spearheading diversity inclusion efforts at the institution. We have a lot of efforts going on at institutions, so I'm very happy to be a part of those. And I'll kind of go in today with some of the efforts that are happening across campus-wide and around the world, actually, and initiatives related to diversity, equity, inclusion. But first, I want to introduce our guests here today. With us today, we have Dr. Mel Campbell and Dr. Gina Wilson. So first, Dr. Mel Campbell. Dr. Campbell has a time-tested and proven track record of helping individuals make transformation in their lives, and he wants to help you do the same for your entire organization. For the past 17 years, Dr. Campbell has taught and spoke over 323 cities throughout 6 countries and has given close to 1,100 presentations and motivated over 47,500 students. Dr. Campbell has reached hundreds of thousands of individuals over the radio and news, and Dr. Mel's education includes an MBA from Northwood University, a Bachelor of Science from University of Tennessee, and a doctorate in psychology where he maintained a 3.9 GPA. And Dr. Campbell is a certified executive coach. So thank you for being here today, Dr. Campbell.
Thank you.
Also with us today is my friend, Dr. Gina Wilson. Dr. Wilson has spent over 20 years as a public school educator, working to mitigate the effects of environmental and educational barriers for students, including trauma-informed program model to meet students' social, emotional needs by blending restorative practices of mindfulness, allowing students to self-actualize in the classroom setting. Dr. Wilson is currently an associate professor of educational leadership at CMU. In that position, she helps prepare current and future school administrators serving as faculty and program director. She has earned her doctorate of education in educational leadership from CMU and a Bachelor of Arts in secondary education and a Master's of educational leadership from SVSU. So welcome, Dr. Wilson. So happy to have you all here today. First things first, I want to get off with our title of our presentation today, how I'll focus on DE&I. So DE&I, for those that Chris did mention, it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. So my first question, I guess, is going to be to Dr. Wilson. Dr. Wilson, I know you're very active in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and as I mentioned, we're going to be referring to these as DE&I throughout the talk today. But based on your experiences in research, could you just give us a quick overview on what these concepts mean?
Absolutely, and I want to thank you all for welcoming me in today to the Northwood family for this brief moment to share my research as well as my learnings as someone who is working in and around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So first off, one of the things about diversity is diversity just is. So in organizations and in communities, we are made up of diverse thoughts, race, gender, orientation, spirituality and beliefs, socioeconomic status, and various lived experience. So we don't have to do much with diversity because we bring it when we commune humans together in spaces. And that kind of leads us then into the equity and inclusion work, because what we really have to do is decide how we as individuals, as well as we as organizations or communities, what we're going to do with that diversity. So are we going to value it? Are we going to ignore it? Are we going to acknowledge it, not acknowledge it? And that's where equity and inclusion kind of come in. When you hear the word equity, and sometimes you'll hear that organizations are doing equity audits or equity work. And what that means is they've decided to look at their diverse spaces and ensure that all the diversity that exists, everyone that exists has access in an equitable fashion, and that there's no institutional or structural barriers that, because of the differences that diversity brings, could be apart. And then there's the inclusion piece. And so, like in K-12 setting, oftentimes the term inclusion is specifically focused on students with disabilities, and that may be in the higher ed setting too. Or you may hear inclusion around populations related to the LGBTQ plus A plus community. But inclusion is another actionable step around how your organization or self are working within diversity, because it's where you seek to understand and include a perspective into decision making, into value assessment, into creation of what is a norm in your organization. And inclusion really creates a sense of belonging for everyone in your organization, community, or in your life, because it acknowledges the difference and welcomes them in to add input, context, and experience.
Thank you so much, Gina. That's extremely helpful to have that baseline of almost an inclusion in DE&I 101. What are these concepts and what do they mean? And so it's really able to have that baseline. And I want to talk, before I ask some more questions to Dr. Campbell and Dr. Wilson, I want to talk briefly about why DE&I work is important to Northwood University and then what we're doing here at Northwood University currently. So I want to reflect back to Northwood's Code of Ethics when I talk about why this is important to Northwood University. So as this is for alumni, I'm sure all of you remember our Code of Ethics spell out the acronym FRESH AIR. So we have freedom, respect, empathy, spirituality, honesty, achievement, integrity, and responsibility. So we have these things that we hold ourselves dear to at Northwood University. And these naturally lend themselves to the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Things like empathy, caring about the thoughts and feelings from others. In the DE&I world, we often talk about seeing things through somebody else's lens. How my worldview and my lens may offer me this perspective. If I put myself in somebody else's shoes and empathize with them and see things through their lens, maybe I'm going to approach things differently, or maybe I'm going to understand better how this impacts them as individuals and impacts them in their communities. So things like empathy and respect, trying to be inclusive and welcome to everyone. These are right within our Code of Ethics, being respectful, empathetic, being honest. And a lot of the DEI work that we'll talk about is a lot of vulnerability, right? You have to be honest with yourself and with others and being like, you know what, I have these long-standing beliefs based on where I grew up and my lived or experiences or lack of experiences. And I have to be honest with myself and kind of recognize where I stand and how to move forward and how it impacts others. So I want to relate that to our Code of Ethics about fresh air. It is integral. The work of diversity, equity, and inclusion is integral, a part of that Code of Ethics. Now, what is Northwood doing about it? So the first things first, I want to bring up a quick poll. I want to make this a little more interactive. We have a few polls for you. So Dan, if you could bring up our poll for us. In this poll, I'm going to ask you, based on the demographics of our current student population here at the University, the Midland campus, what percentage of Northwood students are not listed as Caucasian? This is based on the fall 2019 numbers. So is it 20%, 30% or 40% of our campus is not considered Caucasian based on data from our demographics. I'll give you a few minutes to take part in this poll. All right, let's see what we can have. Let's pull up the current results, Dan, if we could. Right, we got a majority saying about 20%. The actual answer is 29.07%, so it's about 30% of our population. So I'm splitting hairs there. So what this is telling us is that Northwood on our Michigan campus is not as diverse as many other locations and many other universities around the United States or even in Michigan. However, what we can strive to be is the most inclusive. That's really what we need to be doing, is recognizing, okay, about 30% of our campus, and I will say too, that includes people who are what's considered non-resident aliens, which are international students. So a lot of our students from Europe who we may consider into the Caucasians would still fall into that 30%. So it may actually be a slightly higher depending on how you analyze that. But going into this, recognizing that, you know what, we have only about 30% of our campus is people of color or people who are not categorizing themselves as Caucasian. So how are they being represented on campus? I would say that the majority of our students who I advise many of our student organizations, and they consistently express desires to see more students who look like them on campus. So making our campus more diverse. But what I would say too with this is that more diverse campus brings different perspectives and experiences. Now, why is this important in Northwood? Well, we're all about innovation, right? Innovation and entrepreneurship. So which is central. So having more diverse backgrounds is going to be central to bringing in different experiences and ideas. So the more diverse the campus is, then the more differing perspectives we're going to bring. And I do see somewhere in a chat saying about this is about campus, about the student body as a whole. I don't have that information readily available, but I could look into that. So if you are interested into that, I can try to work with our data team here at Northwood and getting some of those information readily available for you. So what are we doing on campus to make then a campus be more inclusive? Well, we're doing a lot of regular scheduling programming, like what's called Soup and Substance lecture series, once a month lecture series related to diversity and inclusion. We have a real talk, which are student organized, having real talks about really difficult conversations. That's bi-monthly, led by students. We have a taste of culture events, which share like recipes from around the world. We have annual human library events, which is where you're engaging with people from diverse backgrounds and really having conversations with them and developing more empathy. We have cultural game nights with our international students organized. We also have specialty programming like our MLK Junior Day. We have a lot of celebrations during Black History Month. We have things during Hispanic Heritage Month, which we had even last a couple weeks ago. We had a mariachi band on campus and teaching salsa lessons and things like this, just that are fun, but broadening people's horizon. And before jumping into talk about student organizations, I have another poll for you. So Dan, if you could bring up our next poll. This next poll is asking, okay, what percentage of LGBTQ youth, which is age 14 to 22, who attended schools without gay-straight alliances, attempted suicide in the United States? So is that going to be 16%, 24%, or 33%? Without peer-supported gay-straight alliances. Okay, let's go ahead and move on and see what results we had from the poll. Wow, overwhelmingly 53%. You are correct. Think about that. 1 in 3 youth age 14 to 22 attempt suicide in the United States if they don't have a gay-straight alliance organization on their schools. Now, I'm going to ask the same question now. We can bring up the next poll. What percentage of LGBTQ who attend schools with gay-straight alliance organizations attempt suicide in the United States? Is it 8%, 12%, or 17%? Take a few seconds to look at that. All right, let's see what we have now for this one. Okay, can we open up the results for this one and see what we have? drops to, a lot of people thought it dropped to 8%. It actually drops, but it only drops to 17%, which is still incredibly high, which tells you a lot about how supported youth in the United States who identify as LGBTQ feel, and even with a peer support group. So it is so important to have these peer support groups. I mean, that's from 1 in 3 down to 17%. Grant, that is still way too high. However, having those support groups is integral and important for our students. And I will say at Northwood, until a few years ago, we didn't have one of these gay straight alliances on campus. In my 6 years here at Northwood, and up until I think it was about 2 years ago, I worked with some students to help establish that, because it's so important. So we do have 3 student organizations on campus that are typically with more marginalized members of our society. So the first is called Sexuality Advocacy for Everyone, SAFE, which is a gay straight alliance here on campus. Support those students. We have the Black Student Union, BSU, which is very active on campus. And we also have the International Student Organization, ISO, which is extremely active as well. Some other organizations on campus, we have our athletic department has a group called Diversity and Inclusion Group, DIG. We also have what's called the OmniQuest. For those of you who don't know, OmniQuest is one book a year that all the campus operating units read and really jump into across our operating units. This year we have a working theme of diversity, equity, inclusion in our across our campus. So we have events throughout the year, 5 events in fall and 5 events in spring related to those. We also have a part of our strategic planning process is we're trying to actively be conscious about diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives when we're planning things like infrastructure or academic support, all these aspects. We're trying to weave diversity, equity, and inclusion, making sure that our campus is welcoming to all people. And really that's for me, the baseline of inclusion is making sure that we are welcoming to people who have differing backgrounds, from disparate backgrounds. So enough from me on my end. I do want to hear from our presenter. So Dr. Campbell, I'm going to jump over to you now and pass it off to both you and Dr. Wilson. So you're a Northwood graduate for the MBA, and I would like to hear a little bit more about you and your story. So can you tell us more about your story, background, and why the work of D&I is important to you?
All right. Thank you very much. And I appreciate you having me on. I think this webinar is extremely important in terms of how we can be more tolerant of other races, understand other races. And I want to tell you that because I myself am of mixed race. I've been called every possible race. And, you know, when you think about the interactions I've had with other students in my college career, college campuses are the campuses that are most open to a lot of new thought that is happening. And there are racial tensions going on right now. And as a psychologist, it is important for me to make more people aware of what's going on in terms of the diversity that's going on our campuses, in our workplace, and in our world. So I grew up in Detroit, and in Detroit, I was during the time that Detroit was the murder capital of the world. My parents actually met during the riots in the 60s. My dad was a soldier, and my mother was actually in the riots. It was a turbulent time. And my dad had joined the Army, and one of the places they stopped to have food, the individuals at the owner of the restaurant would not serve my father. He was the only black soldier, and the entire platoon walked out. And I thought that was a powerful story, my dad telling me about that experience and how it's different in other countries, how different diversity is, and how the attitudes are. And going to college, I went to University of Tennessee, Chattanooga. I was one of the first blacks to integrate the white fraternities there. I received death threats from the black fraternities. And it was a time where people would come up to me and touch me and say, I said, why did you touch me? You're the first black person I ever touched. And I was just so shocked that, you know, that was the case back in the 90s. So educating my fraternity brothers about, you know, what a black person was like was great. And they say, I don't like black people, but I like you. And I was like, wow. So that happened to me 3 times. People would come up to me and touch me and wonder about me. So I've had the hunger to educate people. And it's funny, when I transferred to Northwood University for my MBA, it's the first year of the MBA program. It was the most diverse class I have ever been in. It was one of the first years of the MBA program. We had people from every country, and I was like, this is how the world should be. You know, we were learning from each other, other cultures, and it was just a really exciting time. So getting my MBA, I then got my degree in psychology, and here I am every day waking people up to how wonderful everyone is, despite, you know, where their background is, what their culture is. And I'm just excited to help and contribute to this conversation today.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Campbell. So I have another question for you, but I do just want to bring out a statistic from an employer standpoint, is that 67% of job seekers actually consider workplace diversity as a really important factor when considering employment opportunities. So I'm going to ask this one to you, Dr. Campbell. So really with two parts, what do you think about the statistic of the 67% of job seekers considering workplace diversity says about the employees' needs and the makeup of companies? That's part one. And the next part is, okay, what struggles do you think employers are having when they're trying to make their companies more diverse and inclusive?
Sure. Well, I think people feel more comfortable in a diverse company. I think a lot of times when you go even to a college and you're choosing a college, the more diverse it is, sometimes there's a lot more opportunities to learn about the world, learn about the culture, especially in a workplace environment. So I think diversity is absolutely necessary in our workplace. I think it's a need because people are seeing diversity in life, and I think when you're around other people, you learn from other people. I think there's more creativity when there are more people being hired, and employers taking the time to really focus on what can we do to get the opinions out of our workers about the diversity topic. Having town halls about it, having anonymous ways that employers can learn about increasing diversity in our workplace. So it's an exciting time that diversity is growing. I think anytime you're set with this is the way we've always done it, companies won't be as flexible as opposed to hearing from other members of their staff to teach them about diversity.
Great. Do you think there's certain struggles that companies have when trying to do this?
Absolutely. I think in the hiring process itself, when I'm going to be doing a seminar on unconscious bias coming up, and it's kind of hard sometimes to recognize unconscious bias in the interviewing process itself. I think it's very important to strategically, if you do this the wrong way, test their thoughts about diversity and see if it fits in the culture, or bringing some aspect of a different cultural attitude into the company can really make a big difference. So sometimes we can get stuck in our ways. And, when I tell you environments such as a Google or a Microsoft or even a Zappos, those cultures are very unique and have a very diverse staff.
Yes. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Campbell. Dr. Wilson, I'm going to ask this next one for you. So a lot of times the concepts of DE&I are new to people, or sometimes people just don't agree with them. For those people who may not agree with, for many people, like these concepts may be new or they disagree, where should they start then? Where can you recommend that they start this journey?
Well, I always function from a place of self. So I start with me to understand myself the best that I can, to build a self-awareness around, and Jeremiah, you mentioned it earlier, around my personal lived experience, my, my values, my norms, my historical context, and how those have influenced who I am in this present moment. Because for me, this work is around seeking to understand others. And if we we can't understand others until we understand ourselves. We can't empathize with others until we can truly articulate our own personal experience. So if you have, and one of the ways I encourage people to identify where the work resides, because you'll often hear people say, do the work, do the work, do the work, right? What does the work mean? And what the work means is it's learning. The work is learning. And so sometimes I encourage people that if they have a strong reaction to something that's said, good or bad, and typically it's bad. Like if they're like, oh, like I'm upset by that caused something in me, just pause. Because whatever that statement was, whatever that experience it is you watch, whatever is disrupting a belief in you. And that's where the work resides. So when we pause and kind of really become contemplative of those moments that are creating these micro disruptions, right, throughout our day, whether it's a small conversation or whether it's an article or whether it's a video clip or whether it's a news feed, right, all of this data, these data that we're inputting can inform where our work resides. And one of the things is if you feel that strong reaction, just to notice it. Don't judge it. Don't push it away. Don't judge the person or the situation that caused the reaction. Just sit with it and notice it. Because when we notice it without judgment, it allows us to make decisions about what we're going to do with it. And because typically that reaction was caused by something that we view as different. And one of the things, and it sounds so simple, is just to let different be different. Unfortunately, in our society, words have been given such power over, and that it's changed their definition. And different is just different. Different doesn't have to be scary. Different doesn't have to be wrong. Different it is just different. So that is really the first step, is journeying into yourself, noticing things without judgment, really putting that pause on that judgment trajectory, and just letting different be different, and letting that different and that strong reaction go into a place of curiosity. Because when we're curious, we're in a state of learning, right? Questions are good because it drives our learning and it drives our knowledge acquisition. So get curious about it. Stay non-judgmental and let different just be different. So those are 3 things that I can encourage people to leave with.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Wilson. So I just had a follow-up for you too. So these conversations related to these issues can sometimes be heated or divisive, as there's a lot of vulnerability associated with bringing up these issues. So what are some strategies that we can all take when we have these conversations and try to find a common ground with others who think differently than we do?
Well, and it goes kind of back to what I started saying, is really stay in that place of non-judgmental curiosity and accept the fact that my lived experience may not be somebody else's, and that's okay. Unfortunately, we live in a world that defines everything as in opposition, right? So if I view my values as good, then your values must be, and we even use the word evil, right? So it's combating those binary defining views that people have, and just, again, neutralizing that because sometimes the different viewpoint comes from someone that we like a lot or that have loved for a very long time. And so when you're engaging in this work, it doesn't mean that because someone you care about, love, respect, right, all of those great things, has a differing opinion. It's when we add judgment to their opinion that then we feel the need to act and to kind of close off the conversation and stop or put them in a box of who they are, right? We then stereotype them into a box based on their differing viewpoints. And the problem with that is the learning stops, the connection stops, the empathy stops. And that is the only thing that is going to allow us all to kind of work in collaboration together around this. I mean, obviously siloed, but collectively, right? Engaging in our own personal work that then we can mobilize within communities, mobilize within organizations, mobilize within families. It is allowing people to share their thoughts and understanding that that's coming from a lived experience, and without your not countering it, because that sounds like conflict oriented, without your you being able to share your lived experience. We never get a whole picture if we keep closing each other off, if we keep boxing each other in, because we don't get to have any meaningful discourse around these very emotional topics in our country right now.
Thank you so much for that, both Dr. Wilson and Dr. Campbell. For sake of time, I am going to open it up to a Q&A now for everyone. to lend these experiences of Dr. Campbell being a Northwood grad and having his PhD in psychology, and Dr. Wilson being so active in the work of the E&I. So I want to open it up. Please, for my little housekeeping, please try to use the Q&A section instead of the general chat for the questions and answers here for us. That'll allow us to keep a little bit better track of the questions. But I would like to open it up to questions for our audience now, for any one of us three, really. Giving a little bit of wait time.
This is the participation part.
That's right. That's right. We had a little poll here from you as well. It can be about Dr. Campbell's experiences here at Northwood or others. And while we're waiting for some questions, I do want to say thank you to Ander Lee. I see in the chat being a military a veteran, so thank you for your service. And I also concur with Joshua Hampspear's assessment that diversity and inclusion efforts do help the bottom line for companies. You look at companies like Dow, who have such an emphasis on inclusion work. I mean, yes, it's an ethical thing to do, but they probably wouldn't be doing it if it didn't help the bottom line. Last I looked, they're not a non-for-profit company. Oh, I do see one. So I'll start with our question from Tara Peters. What are companies doing well with diversity and inclusion efforts, and where are their gaps? I'll open this up to Dr. Wilson or Dr. Campbell, to answer this one.
Mel, I'm from an education context, so I can view that in an organization. So when an educational organization goes to implement diversity and equity and inclusion efforts, what they tend to do is look at our components that comprise the organization. So we'll look at curriculum, we'll look at policy, we'll look at procedure, right? Where I think the gaps are in education is that we never look at the individuals that are enacting policy, delivering curriculum, right, and implementing process and procedure. We don't tend to do the work with the individual mindsets around equity and inclusion work. So then we can have all of our paper is gorgeous. The language is there, the vocabulary is there. It would pass any equity audit, but the practice of the people can still impede all of that great organizational structural work. So for me, you always start with the people in creating that disruption in their understandings, beliefs, and values, rally it around the organizational belief and value that now is inclusive and equity-minded, so that you can then transform your organization from the human within the human capital and then out into then the cultural, the norms, the organizational systemic structure. So that's from a school context.
Yeah. From a company construct, I love, Gina, what you were saying about looking inside yourself. I think companies need to do that. Are we diverse? Are we inclusive? If not, why? What are our gaps? So essentially doing a strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat analysis on what's going on with their environment. And they learn and they grow. When you do initiatives that are just checking boxes, that doesn't work, as opposed to really doing the self work with your employees and sitting down with them and say, currently here's our situation, here's where we were in the past, here's where we are now, and here's where we want to go in the future. And it is all about the attitude and the behavior of what's going on in companies, and just really waking up to saying, hey, we're not wanting to check boxes there. We really do care. And really have management buy into that. And the results are going to speak for itself. This work is worth it. And you'll see the results in the creativity that happens in your staff, as well as staff wanting to be there and really wanting to contribute and really want to talk about what's going on. If we start at the company level and really give employees the voice that they need in an organization. When I was at IBM, I worked at IBM, MCI, Equifax, and I look around me and I don't see people that are, like me. I'm curious. I want to learn. I want to share people my experiences as well. So it is about giving employees voice and really asking the questions to get the results.
And I would just add on top of what Dr. Campbell has noted that instead of just checking a box, there's a lot of top-down initiatives for unconscious bias training, but it really has to start with empathy, because if you're not best in this yourself, the impacts are going to be diminished, and it's going to be checking a box. So it really has to start with fostering programs that develop more empathy and trying to be like, you know what, I am curious. I'm naturally curious, as Dr. Wilson said, to the lens of others. And because if that's not there, that empathy and natural curiosity and the work within yourself, any top-down initiatives implemented, the impact are going to be diminished. So it has to start with empathy for me.
Yeah.
One more point to that too that I wanted to make was, and this is in the self work or your family work or your organizational work, is to really check your motivation. Because you can say you're engaging in this work, right? But are you seeking to understand and build more empathy, right? So you can make that transformation with an organization itself, or are you just going to prove a point? Like, are you just there to counter and refute and not to sit in a space of learn, or are you there to seek common ground? Because this does come at a point when you're sharing dialectical viewpoints. You need to find a commonality. And I can tell you, the more you lean in a place of seeking to understand, you will find that even though the journey begins around valuing diversity, you find the commonality, which then fuels your work of connection. And I'm going to go out of my lane into Dr. Campbell's around the motivation of humanity is for connection and sense of belonging, and we thrive in those spaces. That's why in organizations that are focusing on this, their human capital is at such a space of high efficiency that their yields go up because we're connected. We're in care of one another. That's our basic human condition. So just making sure that you're checking your motivation of the organizations and the spaces that you have power and privilege in, and then making sure that you're checking that internal motivation in self when you engage in the critical discourse. Because if you're not in the right space, you could really cause some harm to yourself as well as to relationships.
And I want to make sure that I make the point too. And Gina, you're saying some of the very components of Dr. Brene Brown's video on empathy on YouTube. You type in empathy and do a view count on YouTube, her video pops up. So it's important we get educated on empathy. We do lunch and learns on the topic, 1 hour. You have an empathy expert come in and teach staff. And the motivation, I am a motivational speaker and a psychologist. There are only two ways that people are motivated in life. Unfortunately, it's pain and pleasure. So we really have to do our best to understand motivation. When we stay motivated in our company, it motivates others.
Thank you both so much for that. I do see one other question in here from Joshua Hampshire. AT&T has recently published diversity figures with all employees in an attempt to provide transparency to all employees, an effort to ensure the leaders of AT&T represent diversity in our country. Is Northwood University working to ensure not only the student base is diverse, but also leadership staff? I'll take on this one to start. I will say that I wish our director of HR was here because we have had these conversations. So it is something that we are very conscious of and wanting to improve on. That we do have statistics on the diversity of our employees, of our leadership, of our faculty, and as I mentioned earlier, we're right now enacting the process of our 2021 to 2026 strategic plan at the institution, and a part of that is our people, looking at the people of the organization, and there's aspects of that trying to be very conscious of diversity, equity, inclusion within that. So it is something I would probably defer to HR for some more details on that, but it is something that the university is thinking about and trying to strive for. And in our efforts in a strategic plan, I think make that clear as well. And Beth Bryce brings a great, just an observation, DE&I would be an excellent short course that Northwood experts should offer to local, national, and global company leaders in a professional development series. Fantastic idea, Beth. Yeah, I think that's showing that we are leaders of a free enterprise. Is part of that is trying to make sure that we are spearheading these and being a leader to companies around the globe. And thank you to David for your comments as well in Q&A. Well, if there are no other questions, I'll just give it another minute. I want to just thank Dr. Wilson and Dr. Campbell for being here. We will be providing a list of resources in a follow-up email tomorrow to everyone with this recording, as well as some resources that, including Dr. Campbell brought up, but many others. As Dr. Wilson said, it's about trying to learn more and be curious. And so we're going to give a number of resources that in your leisure you can dive into to learn more about the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion and how it can apply to your company and to your employees as well. So I don't think we're seeing any more questions. So I want to thank everyone for being here today. It's been a pleasure, and I truly appreciate it.
Thank you for including me in.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.